In this video, we're going to have a look at how to render a wooden floor. Now, here's a couple that I did earlier on, and you can see that this one represents a darker wood with warmer tones like mahogany. This one is lighter, it could be an ash or an oak. The yellower ones could represent pine. So it's important to have an image of what you're rendering in front of you so you can pick up on the nuances and colour and so on. And also to give you an idea of how the grain lies in the wood. Now something like this to this scale, particularly the wood, is probably suitable for a drawing, maybe scale 1:10, where you're detailing something and zooming in and maybe showing your client how all the materials are going to go together. We will be rendering a floor plan later on, scale 1:50, just to show you how the detail is taken out when the scales reduce in size. Okay, so we're going to have a go at this one today and maybe this one as well. So I'm just going to put this over here and I'm going to start. So I just take an ordinary pencil, like a B pencil or something like that, and I mark out the grain. Now I've already done this, but you may not be able to see it in the video. But I've basically marked in the grain lengthways here, and then I've shown where you can actually see the rings of the tree. So when you're rendering, you're not just, giving a representation of something, you're also sort of studying how it came to be, how it was created by nature, if you like, and it does help when you have an understanding of that when you're rendering. Okay, so you can see here I've marked out the grain here, like this. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to enhance this. So in order to do that, I use a dark brown pencil. Now in this case I'm using a walnut. The colour is called walnut and they're Polychromos pencils. I think I've recommended that you use these already. There are also other browns like Van Dyke brown and umber. This one I think is Van Dyke brown, and umber perfectly suitable too. Now start off light so that you have options in that you can alter the colour of it, either darkening it or changing the colour. Whereas if you go in very heavy in the beginning, then you reduce the options you have. Okay, now you can see here what I'm doing here is just shading very lightly on one side of that line. And again, you build this skill over time. The more you do it, the better you get at it. So it's literally just something that you learn by doing it. So I'm just shading a little bit inside the line here, just to give it that little bit of depth and show the grain in the wood. Now I'm going to do it on the same side of the line here. This is where the grain is just, it's simpler than the one on the left. And I'm holding my pencil in this way. Now this is worth showing you. So if I'm using the very tip of my pencil, it gives quite a fine line. Whereas if I use the side, it gives a kind of a wider line, but you can see the line, it's darker on one side and it fades out. So I'm using this kind of line to achieve the grain. Now I'm going to do it here again. And this doesn't have to be perfect and the lines don't have to be perfectly straight because, as you know, it's very hard to find a straight line in nature, so it's more straightforward. Okay, so I'm doing the same on this as well. And I'm just going to shade it in a little bit. Okay, now I've chosen a range of markers to use here, and they're from the Copic range and from the Pro Marker range. You can buy cheaper markers. I have a load of them here, but what you'll find is the colours are not as good. They're not as subtle as the ones that you get in the more expensive ones, sadly. So I would ask that you get a few expensive markers. So I'm just having a look at the colours. Okay, So I'm going to go for the golder one, and I like this one as well, the sort of lighter one there. Okay, so I'm just looking at all those and thinking about how they may go together. Now I'm just going to finish the lines here. Okay, so that's basically what you start out with. Now a lot of people block in the colour first when they're doing the likes of wood grain. I don't. Now there's pros and cons to this. The benefit to this is when you put the marker over it, it blends it slightly, but it also kind of wrecks your marker. You can easily clean your marker afterwards though, so I just prefer to do it this way. I mean, if you want to, you can literally block out the colour first, then put the grain in, and then layer more colour in. Okay, so I'm going to have a look at this now. I just want to see how this looks. Yeah, that's looking good. Okay. Now, I'm going to use the flat tip here. I have a whole load of markers here to my right, just pushing them out of my way. Now, so you just layer in the colour very quickly, going over it, and if you miss a bit, it really doesn't matter. You can see I'm sort of missing bits in there. And it all goes together to build a picture of the material that you're using. Okay, now, so that's the first layer on. Now, that's quite a nice colour. You could say that that might represent something like a maple. It's quite light, or even an ash might have a little bit yellow in it for an ash. But I'm just going to start building the colour now. So I'm layering over it in the same colour marker. And I'm looking at my wood grain and I'm enhancing the grain in areas. You see, when you put the marker over another layer of marker, it goes almost like it goes one shade more intense. Now I'm going to go back over it in the darker pencil. Just to enhance the grain again. So what you're doing is you're building a picture of your wood rather than getting it right straight away. And again, this is stylistic. It depends on what kind of interior you're designing. Like if you were designing a very sort of graphic, simple interior, you might kind of reinforce that style in your rendering, and it might be less detailed and more graphic than this one here. There's a good bit of detail in this. So I'm just enhancing that wood grain. I'm just going to slightly darken the line there, so it's almost like the line of the floorboard. Now you wouldn't put that in very heavy the whole way because it just wouldn't look right. It's not how your eye perceives it. And I'm just going to do another bit there. And now I'm leaning heavily here now again, so you can see it's heavy there and there and there. I'm just going to put it in a little bit heavier here, a little bit here, maybe a little bit there. I'm going to leave it. Okay, now that as it stands is a good representation of wood, but I want to build the colours up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is, imagining that this is the wall, I'm just going to shade a little bit in here just to show that little bit of light and shade. Now I turn my page around to do this because it kind of suits me. Not everybody works that way. And I'm going to do that on this side as well. Now I'm looking at that and I feel that I would like my wood to be a little darker. So I'm going to take a colour that's similar to the one I've already used, but it's a slightly different hue, very slightly different hue. And sometimes when you use two colours that are very similar together, it creates a really nice nuance of colour. So I'm going to go for the pick tip again here. We're going to see how this sort of builds up. I think this works a little better just because it reduces the contrast between the grain of the wood and what's around it. Now, another thing to mention is you can also slightly alter the colour of your wood just using your colour pencils, like coming in very subtly here. You know, like say for example, if you wanted to add a little bit of a warmer tone or a red to it, there's no problem doing that. And this is where the pencils go over the markers really, really well. So you can see how that just changes the feel of the wood altogether. I'm just going to bring it up here too now a little bit. Maybe on this one. You don't need to do it everywhere. Now, another tip is that white pencil goes over this incredibly well. Now I hope you can kind of get that in this video, so you can, you know, you can put as much or as little detail into this as you want in terms of colour and line and texture. Now I'm looking at this and I want to go over it just one more time just to pull it all together, and then we have our wooden floor. And there we have it.